Story 1. A few years ago, when I was on active duty in the military, I served as an officer in the healthcare field. Overall, I enjoyed my time in service, but the bureaucracy of a massive organization like the military eventually started to wear on me. As a healthcare professional, I often used my days off to work in private practice, commonly referred to as moonlighting, since the pay was significantly better. This was perfectly acceptable within the military, and most healthcare providers took advantage of it. There were a few procedural steps to follow, but most commanders had no issue with it. Many even did it themselves. Unfortunately, leadership changes often, and at one point, we ended up with a first sergeant who seemed to enjoy making things difficult for officers whenever he had the chance. There was a time when I submitted a leave request for a day I planned to work in private practice, but he denied it on a technicality. I don't remember the exact reason. Maybe I had submitted it a day late or something minor like that. Regardless, I wasn't going to let that stop me. I quickly reviewed our unit's sick call policy and made sure to download a copy for reference. Officers were given quite a bit of leniency, and according to policy, there was no requirement to report to work or submit a doctor's note unless the absence lasted 3 or more days. This wasn't just a written rule, it was also the way things were actually handled in the unit. No officer ever did more than simply call in sick if they needed to miss a day. So, the day I had originally requested off arrived, and unfortunately I developed some sniffles. Naturally, I called in sick. The first sergeant was not happy about this and immediately told me to report to sick call and submit a doctor's note. I responded, "Sure, just show me the policy that says I need to do that." This led to a back-and-forth exchange all morning while I was working at the private practice. He kept insisting that I needed a note, and I kept pushing back, pointing out that I was being treated differently from every other officer in the unit. Finally, he came back with, "The commander says you need a doctor's note, so you need one." That was something I couldn't argue with, at least not in the moment. In the military, when a commander gives a direct order, you pretty much have to follow it. Cue malicious compliance. Due to an unusual circumstance, my private practice office and home were about an hour away from the base where I was stationed. However, there was another military base in the town where I lived. I had previously been stationed there, but was later reassigned to the current base. Since I didn't want to uproot my family, I decided to make the commute instead of moving. Rather than drive all the way to the base where I worked, I devised a plan to visit the medical facility at the base closer to me. By this time, it was close to lunchtime, and I had about an hour before my next set of patients at the private practice. I quickly drove to the hospital emergency room on the nearby base. As I walked in, I started convincing myself of just how sick I felt. By the time I reached the check-in desk, I had put on a pretty convincing performance. I told the receptionist that I had been throwing up all morning and couldn't keep anything down. The nurse took one look at me and said, "Yeah, you don't look too good." I wasn't sure whether to take that as validation or an insult. A provider saw me quickly, diagnosed me with a stomach virus, and asked why I had come in for something so minor. I explained that my commander had ordered me to get a doctor's note. The provider was clearly irritated by that, but wasn't surprised. It seemed like something he had dealt with before. I was about to be discharged when he decided that, since I had supposedly been vomiting all morning, I could probably use some fluids. So, he ordered an intravenous drip. I glanced at my watch. I had about 30 minutes left in my lunch break. Since my morning had been busy, I hadn't kept up with my water intake, so I figured, why not? They hooked up the Roman 4, and I relaxed for the next 20 minutes, scrolling through my phone while getting nice and hydrated. Story 2. This happened 2 years ago. I had 2 graduation ceremonies, one in the 9th grade and one in the 10th grade. The one in the 9th was awesome. I finally stepped out of myself and I sang in front of over 300 people. "You Raise Me Up" by Lena Park. I was so happy and everyone loved it. I could see my grandpa raising his chin because he was so proud. After that, every teacher knew me as the girl who sang at the ceremony. At the start of the next year, my class teacher, my classmates, and the vice principal immediately asked me if I could do that again, and I was honored. I was bullied and very unpopular for most of my life, so it was really nice to get praised so much. I also really loved to sing, so I obviously said yes. Fast forward till the end of the year. All grades were settled, and we only had 3 things left to do. Go on a trip with a class for a week. Go on another trip with the class for 1 day and plan the ceremony. During the week-long trip, our class planned to perform the cup song on graduation. Every class had to do something, with the whole class doing the cups and background vocals, and with me being the front singer. We trained a lot. I learned the cup thing too, even though I wouldn't do that later. It was amazing. Unfortunately, 2 of our classmates were injured in an accident. They came to the ceremony, but they couldn't participate in the cup song. Knowing that we needed these 2, we asked 2 friends from our parallel class to help us out, and they happily agreed. Enter the entitled mother. Her kid, the entitled kid, was in our parallel class too, and she wasn't happy about the fact that we didn't ask her to join us. Her mom was yelling at us about how we dare to exclude her sweet little baby from our class thingy. We explained that we had no space left on the stage for someone else, since we needed space for the performance. The entitled kid wasn't having it, and so there was this almost 18-year-old woman crying to her, like 15, 16-year-old classmates. The entitled mother looked at me and grinned. "Well, my kid could just be your lead singer then," she said, shrugging her shoulders. I looked confused and told her, "Sorry ma'am, but I already do that. We planned this for weeks now and the ceremony is in 3 days. I don't think that." The entitled kid stops me. "You just don't want me to be the school star." Now I was even more confused. None of us would stay at this school, so why would she care about this? Entitled kid, "I'm sorry, okay. But you can't learn the lyrics. Learn to time everything perfectly with the rest of the class, and since when do you even sing?" I asked her. She and her mom would screech at me before running off to the principal. My class and I laughed it off and continued with our preparations. This was our last day at school since we'd go to an amusement park the next day, and then the other day, the 9th graders would have graduation. Shortly before the end of our session, our class teacher came to us, looking quite down. The entitled mother and kid, with raised noses and huge grins on their faces. You and my kid will sing together at the graduation. Since I don't want to stress her with timing, the rest of you will only do the cups." "No singing," he said. Everyone was shocked and angry. We all worked so hard on this. Apparently the entitled kid cried about getting bullied and stuff by us. So either we'd let her perform with us, or no one would perform, so she joined us. The next 2 days, I texted her and talked to her on the trip about which part she'll sing since we'd split it in 2. She either ignored me, said we'll talk later, or stopped bothering me. In the end, we decided a minute before the ceremony started. I gave my friends a look which they returned, and for my part, everything went great. I saw those proud faces on my family and our teacher, and I heard that the cup part went well too. I got a bit confused already when the entitled kid and I started to sing the refrain together. It sounded off, it was more sing-talking. When she had to sing alone though, oh boy, I noticed the grin on the entitled mother's face faded away and everyone looked quite funny. The kid was totally out of rhythm. She screeched the text and I could hear how her throat got dry. She breathed loudly and missed every single note. I had to think about how much that'd hurt later. If you sing wrong, it can hurt and your voice bands can get damaged. You could tell she didn't warm up or do anything you should do before singing. She didn't even get the text right. I looked at my classmates and they were giving the entitled mother and her kid death glares, since they all worked very hard for this. I then looked at our music teacher who just gave me this just go through it face. So when the refrain came again, I'd act like everything was okay. After the ceremony was over, my classmates and I talked through what happened there and eventually laughed a bit. Then the entitled mother and her kid again. The kid charged at me and pushed me away a bit. I look at her a bit mad but also confused. Before I could say something, the boys, who were very overprotective about us girls in the class, stepped between us and glared at the entitled kid with looks that could kill. The entitled mother then yelled at me, "You little witch destroyed my baby's big day." I then replied, "Your entitled kid didn't even know the right text. Plus, she was the one who threw everyone off." I looked right at the entitled kid with that last sentence. The entitled kid scoffed. "You couldn't even hit a single note. You were a total disaster. That's why I wanted to be the only lead singer." That's where our music teacher, who taught me how to sing, stepped in. "Entitled kid, please leave her alone now. The next time you get into a project like this at the last minute, you should at least try to learn the text and some of the singing methods. They all trained this for months. Either you can learn something they trained for months in 3 days, or you just stay out of it," he said, quite mad. He took our class under his wings and helped us a lot with this project. The entitled mother wanted to say something, but then my family came to us too. They all are huge and look quite intimidating. The entitled mother just scoffed and pulled her daughter away. End of story. We laughed at this story while drinking some booze in the cups they clapped with. Even though I wasn't in that school anymore, I continued to come for the school band to watch the kids and get some lessons from my teacher until 2020 when, you know what came. Never saw the entitled kid again, but I met her brother a while ago. He's very nice, and he told me his sister is happily married now. Good for her. I just hoped she wouldn't sing at her wedding. Story 3. So this happened a while ago, but yesterday something almost identical happened to me at the same Domino's, so I figured I'd share. I, 24, male, was in line at a Domino's, and where I live you're allowed one person in the shop at a time, and the rest have to wait outside in a queue. I was about third in line with about 4 other people behind me, minding our own business, standing about 2 meters apart. Some older guy, probably 40s, parks across the road behind me, jumps out and walks towards the line. Looks at everyone without breaking stride, and just walks straight in the door, while someone is in there doing pizza-related ordering. "You know there's a line out here, right?" I ask. The guy turns around and looks at me like I'd pooped in my hands and clapped in his face. "Who are you talking to?" "You. We're all waiting in line and you just cut in front of all of us. You need to watch who you're talking to. I ordered a pizza already." "Yeah, so have I as well as other people here, and we're waiting our turn." The guy then stares me down, walks out of the shop and gets in line, all whilst glaring at me. I go in, and of course, my pizza isn't ready so I have to wait. Meanwhile, I can hear the guy talking to someone he knows in line about how disrespectful I was and how rude I was. I ignored it and just looked at my phone. People come and go, and the guy walks in, and obviously, his pizza is ready. He walks out of the shop and walks straight up to me, with his pizza pretty much pressed into my chest. "You need to show more respect. You were very rude, and I didn't like it," he tells me. "I didn't think I was, and you cut the queue, but anyway. Have a nice evening and enjoy your pizza. Pull down your mask, I want to see your face." "No, I don't want to." "Pull it down, now." "No, I will not." He then starts pushing the pizza into my chest, so I stare at him waiting for him to do something. He eventually backs off and walks back to his car. I wait another 10 minutes before I realize the lady behind the counter inside has basically forgotten all about me, grab my pizza and head home. Story 4. Backstory: I own a towing company, and part of our contracts includes impounds and repossessions. This story takes place in late fall of 2019. Note: since I know people are going to ask, I carry a Chris Vector in my truck and a SIG P320 pistol on me. Thankfully, neither was needed this day. Alright, so it's story time again, and this is by far one of my favorites from years of working in this field. Karen's car was up for repossession, and we received the paperwork on September 29th. By October 3rd, I was regularly sneaking by her house at all hours of the night and day, searching for the car, but I just couldn't seem to find it. Finally, just before Halloween, voila, it was sitting in the driveway. It was around 11:30 at night, and I just happened to swing by on my way home from dinner with my wife. Coincidentally, we had taken the tow truck to dinner with us. Leaving the truck and my wife about 300 meters away, I grabbed my flashlight and clipboard with the repo order on it and snuck up to the car, humming the theme from an old Tom Cruise movie. I do this every time without fail. Would you look at that? It's Karen's car. Her car was a rear-wheel drive and parked nose-in, which meant all I had to do was call my wife, have her back the tow truck in, and we'd be gone in less than 30 seconds. My wife turned off all the lights and lowered the stinger as low as possible before backing up the driveway. She hit the switch to disable the reverse lights and backup beeper so we could go full stealth mode. The stinger slid perfectly under the car, and she snapped it closed. Now, here's where things got interesting. Just as my wife started lifting the car, I heard Karen make her appearance. "Karen, what the heck do you think you're doing?" I looked up and saw her standing at the top of a small set of stairs directly across from me. She was a woman in her 50s, wearing a nightgown and fumbling with a shotgun. Immediately, I dove for cover behind the car parked in front of me. Karen, still struggling with the shotgun, swung it out into her left arm to pump a round into the chamber. As she slammed the slide down to secure it, the gun kept going. She had dropped it. Now, the shotgun was rolling down the stairs. I peeked over the car, watching as it tumbled end over end, bouncing down the steps. Just before it hit the ground, the gun went off with a loud bang. Right after the shot, I heard whistling and felt the car I was pressed against suddenly drop to a strange angle. Karen had just shot her own now repossessed car. "Karen, you complete idiots, you damaged my car." My wife was already on the phone with the police. I had pulled my sidearm. Me. Get on the ground now. Karen, however, had her own plans. She was also calling the police, claiming that 2 men were attempting to steal her car and had damaged it. She conveniently left out the part where she fired a gun and didn't even seem to notice that I was holding mine. She went back into her house. I quickly threw 2 straps onto the rear wheels of the car to keep it from falling off the tow truck, as the front passenger tire was now flat. My wife stepped out of the truck to cover me with another firearm from the cabin. As fast as possible, I jumped into the passenger seat, and my wife drove 2 blocks away to wait for the police. We waited a few minutes before the police arrived at Karen's house. We could hear the sirens getting closer, so we stayed put. We wanted to make sure we didn't escalate the situation further by returning right away. When the officers finally arrived, we drove back to explain the situation. The police were already speaking with Karen, who was hysterically trying to convince them that we were criminals attempting to steal her car. As I stepped out, one of the officers immediately recognized me. We had worked on repossessions together in the past, so he knew I was legitimate. Still, they had to follow protocol. My wife and I were both asked to provide identification, as well as the paperwork proving the repossession order. While we were doing that, one of the officers asked Karen if she had a firearm. She immediately denied it. That might have worked, except for the shotgun still lying at the bottom of the stairs. One of the officers retrieved the gun and radioed in the serial number. It didn't take long for them to confirm that the shotgun was stolen. That's when everything really fell apart for Karen. Suddenly, her aggressive attitude shifted. She started backpedaling, claiming she had no idea where the gun had come from and that we must have planted it to frame her. The officers weren't buying it. They placed her in handcuffs while continuing their investigation. Meanwhile, I was inspecting the damage to the car. The front passenger side tire was completely blown out, and there were fresh bullet holes along the side. Karen's single accidental shot had managed to do more damage to her vehicle than we ever could have. After what felt like an eternity, the officers officially cleared us to leave. They assured us that they had all the necessary evidence, including the bullet holes, the stolen firearm, and my wife's 911 call. We didn't need to stick around any longer. We drove away with Karen's car still hooked up to the tow truck, leaving her standing there in handcuffs, yelling about how unfair it all was. We didn't see Karen again until it was time for court. But as it turned out, she wasn't even allowed to own a firearm. Worse yet, the gun was stolen. Karen was charged with attempted armed robbery, possession of a firearm while committing a felony assault, malicious destruction of property, which, ironically, was her own car that we were repossessing, and possession of a firearm by a felon. When the case went to court, Karen pleaded guilty to the charges. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the bank. In small claims court, we were able to recover a total of $16,000 in damages due to mental distress. So, please, if your car ever gets repossessed, just let it go. Even if there's a chance you can get it back before it's processed, don't put lives in danger. Especially not your own. Story 5. I, a 31-year-old female, used to work at a particular chain dollar store with a red and yellow label. I was the manager of one of these stores from ages 18-20 years old, so over a decade ago. This store was located in a very rural upstate New York town with a population of less than 1,000 people, and has remained one of very few choices for home goods and food in this town without traveling more than half of an hour into the larger town nearby. While I managed this store, I met Helen. Helen is an elderly woman who had worked for the company for over 20 years when I worked there. She's a very mild-mannered and chippy lady who enjoys running the cash register and organizing any display that doesn't have a planogram. I love Helen. I have kept touch with her over Facebook as I put myself through college and moved many states away. Helen still works for this store. Sorry for the novel, but I feel like all of this is relevant information. Fast forward to last week. I'm in New York visiting my husband's family. His sibling had a baby, and decided I would trek into my old town to visit Helen at work and bring her Dunkin' Donuts coffee, a ritual I held while working there. I also wanted to take her to lunch on her break. So I arrive at the store and, of course, because they have always been understaffed, she's swamped. Out of the 2 potential registers open, Helen is the sole cashier ringing people out. Typically, it's only 1 staff member, 1 manager on duty, and I have no idea where her boss is. I wander the aisles looking for the manager to let him know she needs backup. As I'm making my way through the store to pop my head into the back room where the bathrooms are, I'm stopped by a shopping cart pushed purposely into my path. "Thank God you're here," says the woman who nearly hit me with her cart. I let out a startled/nervous chuckle as I stared at her face, desperately searching for something familiar to jog my memory. Nothing. I remember absolutely nothing about this lady, but she seems to remember me. "I'm in a hurry and I need you to open that second register. I would think by now you would know better than to have Helen manning the registers alone on a Friday afternoon. She's too slow." "Ma'am, I'm trying to find the manager right now to send her backup." "Nonsense. You're the manager. I remember you. Don't lie to me." I lost my collective sense and burst into laughter. "What?" is all I managed to get out. "Girl, everybody knows you run this god-forsaken store. Go help her." I look down at my shirt to make sure I'm not wearing red, the uniform. Nope, and say to this lady, "I haven't worked for this company in over a decade, ma'am. I'm just here to see Helen. Now get your cart out of my way so I can get her back up." She pauses for a second, tense like she was about to scream. Then exhales in an animated fashion and slowly pulls her cart back. "All right, but you definitely know how to run the register." I push the double doors open to the back room and say, "I do not work here." Thankfully, I ran nearly straight into Helen's boss. He quickly went up front to check her out. I still have no idea who she was, and I remember most of my regulars. It threw me for such a loop. Helen and I had a great lunch. She swears she's never seen that lady before either. Story 6. Before getting into the main story, some background information is necessary. Prior to this incident, I already had a history of at least 2 concussions. The first occurred in middle school when I fell off a swing set mid-swing, and the second happened after I hit my head on my garage door in a moment of carelessness. There were several other head injuries along the way, but none were serious enough to be classified as full-on concussions. My parents are divorced, And at the time, I was living with my father full-time because my mother had kicked me out of her house during my freshman year of high school. For several months leading up to this event, I had been planning a trip to a well-known amusement park with my father to celebrate my 18th birthday in January 2024. I was genuinely looking forward to it. The incident. In December 2023, when I was 17 and about to turn 18, I visited my younger brother 14 at the time and my mother for dinner. After we ate, my brother and I had a small disagreement over who got to sit in the front seat, typical sibling behavior. However, during the scuffle, my brother accidentally slammed the car door directly onto the side of my head. Now, my brother is an avid rock climber who trains 6 days a week, whereas I'm pretty scrawny, so the impact was strong. As I settled into the back seat, my head started to ache significantly. During the ride, I mentioned how the car door had hit my head, but my brother refused to acknowledge it, let alone apologize. This really upset me. When we arrived at my mother's house, I asked her why she didn't intervene. She brushed it off, and I left shortly after, driving back to my father's place. By the time I got home, I was in tears. I don't even fully remember why. I just recall being in pain and telling my dad that my brother had accidentally hit me with the car door and wouldn't apologize. The aftermath. The details from this point on are a bit blurry, so I don't remember the exact timeline of events. I vaguely recall going to the doctor and being diagnosed with a concussion. Since this happened in December, it was right before finals and my birthday, December 16th. I informed my school about my concussion, and they were understanding enough to allow me to freeze my grades and skip finals. My grades at the time were mostly A's with 2 B's. The school advised me to rest, which should have been the end of it. Unfortunately, that's when the real trouble started. Almost immediately, both my parents began pressuring me to take my finals so I could improve my B grades, which were in my most challenging classes. I tried to explain to them that I needed to rest, and taking exams while concussed could lead to poor performance and lower my grades even further. However, they refused to listen. My dad even told me that if I wasn't feeling well enough to take the exams, I should go to the emergency room. Despite my repeated attempts to emphasize that I needed to recover, my parents kept pushing me to do things while I was supposed to be resting. As a result, I essentially missed my 18th birthday because I ended up sleeping for 17 hours straight. This, combined with the fact that brain injuries make it harder to regulate emotions, led to what I can only describe as a complete breakdown. Late at night, I broke into uncontrollable sobs in my bed. I texted my dad, letting him know that I felt like I needed to go to the emergency room in the morning. Concerned, he came into my room and asked if I was okay. Through tears, I told him that my head hurt terribly and I didn't know what to do. I also mentioned that I probably wouldn't be able to take the rest of my finals. Instead of being understanding, he insisted once again that I should take them. I told him there was absolutely no way I could. Then, to my utter frustration, he said that if I wasn't feeling better soon, we should cancel my birthday trip. That only made things worse because I had been looking forward to that trip for months. He left the room, but shortly after, he returned and said he would just take me to the emergency room right then. The hospital visit. I continued sobbing the entire way to the hospital and during admission. The nurses suggested running a computed tomography scan, which is a medical imaging test to check for any severe brain injury. Thankfully, the scan didn't show anything alarming. The doctors concluded that I had a concussion and advised me to take it easy and rest. 2 days later, despite the medical advice, I returned to school to attempt my remaining finals as my parents had insisted. This turned out to be a terrible decision. Almost immediately, I developed the worst headache I had ever experienced in my life. I sat at my desk, head down, feeling like my skull was going to explode. I don't clearly remember everything that happened next, but at some point, I decided to head to the nurse's office. On my way there, I ended up vomiting into a nearby trash can. This terrified me because, in my concussed state, I remembered that vomiting could indicate a severe concussion. Panicked, I called my dad and asked him to pick me up from school and take me to the doctor again. In hindsight, it might not have been necessary, but at the time, I was exhausted, in pain, and not thinking straight due to the lack of rest. My dad responded by saying he would ask my sister, who was 20 at the time, to take me instead. So, I texted her, asking if she could help. Her response was anything but supportive. She angrily replied that I didn't have a concussion and needed to stop being dramatic. Confused, I asked what she meant, and she explained that my dad had told her over lunch the previous day that the computed tomography scan didn't show anything, so I must be fine. A quick online search would have shown that concussions don't even appear on computed tomography scans. But more importantly, I clearly remembered the nurses telling me I had a concussion. I turned to my dad and asked why he had told my sister otherwise. His response? "I think everyone has had enough of this. We just want this to be over with." As if I had chosen to have a concussion. As if I was somehow prolonging it on purpose. At that point, it had only been about a week, maybe a week and a half at most. My recommended recovery time was at least 2 weeks, which likely needed to be extended because, once again, my parents weren't letting me rest properly. Eventually, we met up with my sister, and I had to convince her to take me to the doctor, while she continuously accused me of faking the whole thing. At the same time, I started receiving text messages from my mother, who was doing the exact same thing. Then, the situation escalated further. My mother threatened to make me pay for the emergency room visit myself, which would have forced me into debt right after I had just turned 18. She even used those exact words. When I finally arrived at the doctor's office, the medical staff reassured me that while my concussion hadn't worsened, my lack of rest had intensified my symptoms. They also confirmed again that I had a concussion and reminded me that concussions don't show up on computed tomography scans. Despite the doctor confirming yet again that I had a concussion and needed rest, my family still refused to take it seriously. My mother kept insisting that I was exaggerating, my sister remained skeptical, and my dad just wanted the entire situation to be over. Their lack of support made my recovery much more difficult than it needed to be. At school, my teachers and counselors were far more understanding. They encouraged me to take my time, offering extensions on assignments and excusing me from any unnecessary work. It was a relief to have at least some adults acknowledge what I was going through. However, the damage from my parents' constant pressure had already been done. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and physically struggling to function. Any attempt to study or even focus for extended periods left me feeling dizzy and disoriented. The headaches were unbearable, and my mood swings were worse than ever. Then came the final blow. My dad officially canceled my birthday trip. He told me that because I wasn't feeling well enough, we wouldn't be going. This wasn't said out of concern for my health, it was framed as a punishment. He made it clear that since I had spent so much time complaining about my symptoms and refusing to take my finals, I didn't deserve to go. I was devastated. That trip had been the one thing I was holding on to through all of this. It was supposed to be my way of celebrating both my 18th birthday and my upcoming graduation. Now, thanks to my parents' complete lack of empathy, it was gone. The breaking point. After my birthday passed in a haze of exhaustion and disappointment, I did my best to push forward. I kept resting as much as possible, trying to recover despite the ongoing stress my family put me under. But their constant dismissal of my condition was taking a toll on my mental health. One night, I had another breakdown, this time over text. I told my mother and sister how deeply hurt I was by their actions, how exhausting it had been to constantly fight for them to just believe me. I told them that their refusal to acknowledge my pain had made an already horrible situation so much worse. Their responses? Both of them doubled down. My sister insisted I was just being sensitive, and my mother accused me of trying to manipulate her with guilt. I was stunned. There was no reasoning with them. No matter how many doctors confirmed my condition, no matter how much evidence I had, they were determined to see me as the problem instead of admitting they had been wrong. At that moment, I realized something important. I couldn't change them. I had spent weeks, years, really trying to make them understand my feelings, but they simply didn't care. No amount of explaining, reasoning, or pleading was ever going to change that. So, I stopped trying. Moving forward, in the weeks that followed, I focused on my own recovery without seeking my family's approval. I leaned on my friends, who were incredibly supportive. I took advantage of the accommodations my school provided and gradually eased back into my routine. And most importantly, I stopped expecting my parents or sister to be the people I needed them to be. By the time I fully recovered, I had made an important decision. Once I moved out, I would be setting some serious boundaries with my family. Their behavior during my concussion had been the final proof that they were not people I could rely on for emotional support. If they weren't willing to respect me or my experiences, then I wasn't going to keep exhausting myself trying to earn their understanding. I'm still working through the emotional scars this whole experience left behind, but I've learned a valuable lesson. Some people will never acknowledge the harm they've caused, and waiting for their validation will only hold you back. Instead of wasting my energy trying to change them, I'm putting that energy into building a better future for myself, one where I don't have to fight just to be heard. And honestly, that feels like the best birthday gift I could have given myself.